Hello, and in this tutorial we're going to look at creating hair for in 3ds Max, and the method that we're going to do is going to be hair that's created with geometry, not with any sort of plugins or anything like that. We're only using things that are in 3D Studio Max. You will need Photoshop just for texture editing and things like that, but everything else is going to be done in here. So the method that I'm going to be doing is I've got this 3D character that I've created from Mudbox. It's just a bust of a character, so as you can see it is fairly dense when it comes to polygons, but texturing the character and getting an area for where the hair is going to lie is really important. And I kind of have this right now to where it's kind of blended in. I don't want to keep the scalp the same color as the skin. The reason being is the hair is going to be the bits of hair are going to be kind of far apart, and it's easier to see this really light color compared to the very dark color of this kind of hair layout that I have. This sculpt was originally Danny Trejo. And the original, I had a mustache and he had his hair sculpted and kind of painted in here, but for this demo I've kind of gotten rid of any of the hair sculpt and the mustache. I'm not going to be making the mustache hair, it just anyway. So the method that I'm doing is going to be first starting, I've got some pieces here that I'm starting with, and turn Wireframe on here. So I'm starting with a plane. The plane is divided up by 3 length segments and 2 width segments. This plane is then, I'm rotating it 90 degrees, so it should be running along the z-axis. From there I end up going into hierarchy and affecting the pivot point and moving it a little bit further down towards the bottom. And I'm also going to align to world so that this is now running along the z-axis. From there I move over into editable poly and I deform this into this kind of leaf shape. From there I put a bend modifier on, and the bend modifier is to bend the geometry this direction. Now I could just take this and pull these points back or whatever. I'm in a habit of doing this, and that's just the way I do it. I could move those back, but you know, this works just the same really. The angle that I've done for the first one is 60 degrees, and it's based on my my pivot direction and my alignment. This bend is taking place along the x-axis, so it is bending this direction. And then from there I put another bend on it. So this bend is going to be bending along the y-axis, and I've turned it -90 degrees. Otherwise, if I don't, it's going to be bent over this direction, which is not what I want. And then I have it bent over like 66 degrees. That doesn't need to be specific. So that's the basic hair strand that I have. Then what I end up doing, and I do rotate this 90 degrees around and then reset my transforms again, -90 degrees. And I do that just for something that's going to happen a little bit later for painting this hair. So I can kind of show you what will end up happening when I get there if I don't do that. So what I've done is I've created basically 3 different hair types here, and then let me rotate these all around. It'll make it easier to see them as I go down through them. So I'm going to rotate these back just in there. So the 3 different ones that I have here are just going to be bent at different angles. Now I've converted these to editable poly since I've done this, but these ones are, I think this one's bent like probably 45 or 90, probably 60 degrees. And then I would say probably like 75, 80, something like that. And then I've taken the center points of my bend modifier and I've just pulled those away a little bit so that it makes them a little bit taller. I could have scaled them, would have done basically the same idea. So that way, the reason I'm doing this is I want to get a couple of different types of hair. And then the next part is I'm bending some over to this side and I'm bending some over to this side. I've also rotated these ones like 10 degrees forward, and then these ones that bend over the other direction I've rotated about 10 degrees back. And this is just so that my hair, each hair strand is really going to be varied whenever I do this. And then I've got a couple that are a little taller and thinner, and a couple more that are a little short and fat, like me. So that's basically all of the hair, and I have 16 of them. The reason I have 16 is whenever I go to unwrap these, so I'm going to unwrap them all together. I'm going to open my editor here and make this nice and big. So if I look at this, this is the unwrap of each of the 16 hair strands. So they're each taking up 1/16 of the entire UV space. And they're all being sat directly next to each other, and their seams are sitting directly on top of one another. Okay, so I'll show you why this is important in a minute. And this really has to get into doing the textures. Now, myself, I'm not awesome at painting textures. It's just not a quality. I'm good at modeling, I'm good at figuring out ways of doing things in Max, but when it comes to painting something like these hair streaks, I've gone online, I've found different brushes and stuff for hair for Photoshop, and they just don't work that well for me. Now, the ones that I have here were not created in Photoshop. So, like I said, since I'm a little bit better at Max, this is the way I end up going about it. So I have another Max file. So I have, let's see, it's probably this one, hair strands. Don't save that. Alright, so what I've done is created hair strands. And these hair strands are basically made up of straight hair, slightly bent, bent a little bit more, a little more, and these ones are kind of rotated so that way I don't get some that are going way off to the side, which is important for the texture. Bent more again, and then some random kind of skewed, twisted hairs. So let me also make this, turn off save frame here so we can see this a little bigger. And these ones are turbo smooth, just to smooth out. You're not actually going to see it, but just to make them a little bit nicer. So these ones are a little bit crazier. So these are like kind of to add a little bit of randomness to it. So with these, if we go into the material editor, we can kind of see. So I'm starting off here, make this a bit bigger. I'm starting off here with my standard material. So my standard material, you can see I have like this specular colored just for rendering out this hair. But if we go into my diffuse slot, so follow that, we get this gradient ramp. So open that up, and the gradient ramp starts off, so this would be the tip of the hair based on the way my UVs are on these strands. The tip is a light brown, the middle is a medium brown, and the bottom is black. But I also have opacity on these. So the opacity, right now I'm using a mix map, so I've got two different maps in here. But basically, we're just going to look at this gradient ramp because that's really the only one you need. I was kind of messing around with making ones look a little more like strands, but these are really not necessary. So if I look at this, this is the base of my hair. Actually, yeah, this is going to be at the base because I have this here rotated 90 degrees. So this gradient ramp at the base is semi-transparent, and then it becomes semi-opaque, and then transparent again. Like I said, that's just the basic. You don't have to worry about any of this stuff. It's not even, I don't even think it's noticeable. I could just easily, delete all that and it's going to look the same. So if we go in on one of these hairs, and I've got render settings here set up, so I'll explain all this too, but turn off my render so I don't accidentally render over something. If I look at what the hair here is doing, I'm going to turn my save frames on again just so I can see exactly what's going to render. And I hit render. Okay, so this is my alpha map. So what I'm getting is, I'm getting the color that will be here. You can't really see it here because it's so dark, and plus this, I have lights in my scene so it's not rendering. But what's important is the opacity. So the hair at the bottom is going to be semi-transparent, gets more opaque, and then will be more transparent at the top as well. And this will happen to all of the hair strands I have here. Then I've put a plane here. This plane is just so I can draw out, object paint these hair strands onto this. And if I go into my object properties by right clicking, I can see that this object is set up to not render. So lights, nothing, it doesn't affect anything with the render. So then I've gone into object paint. Now, if you don't know what object paint is, I have another tutorial that kind of goes through it thoroughly. But basically I've made it so these hairs are aligned to the z-axis. So what I'm basically doing is painting all of these hairs. So I have a list here that shows, well, it would show all the hair objects. I've removed it from here since, but it would show all the individual hair strands that I've made. And then I'm painting these objects on here. So I've just kind of filled in here. And they're aligned to the Z, so they're painting straight up based on the normal map. Not the normal maps, the normals. They're also painted randomly in the Z. Now this has been changed because I've done some stuff in the program, so it's not keeping this in when I open it up. But random in the Z, so that means when I paint these, they're all rotated at any random order. And then the size that I had in here, so my scale was set to random, and I'm painting them random between two sizes. And so I painted these on here. So if I look through my camera is seeing the hair from an orthographic view. So if I go to my camera settings, it's set up as, where is it? There it is, orthographic projection. So it's basically treating it almost like front, top, left view. There's no perspective in here. So what's nice about this is that it's not going to take into consideration that these hairs are closer to the camera than these ones. I've also put a light in here that's linked to my camera. And see, this is all stuff that I do. Oh, come on. Silly. Oh, I should hide these two for the render, just to show you kind of what's happening. So I'll hide those. Oh, that's why I couldn't select my light. Silly me. Okay. So if I go into the left view, I can see that my light is set up with attenuation, far attenuation to be exact. And I've got it so the hairs that are closest to the camera are being lit the brightest, and the ones furthest are darker. And I've kind of made my light color a little bit yellowy. It's not perfectly white. I have ray trace shadows on that are being created by this. And like I said, this is linked to the camera. So why is it important that it's linked to the camera? Well, like I said before, I'm not awesome at texturing, so I get around it by doing things like this. So if I render this, Yes, I must have object selected. Okay, so if I go into my render settings, I have my area to render set to crop. So it's cropping to only things that are selected. So that's why I had this set on geometry. So I'll select all the hairs and I'll hit render. The reason I have it cropping is so I'll let this render out so we can see what it looks like. I'll get back to my point in a second. Let's pull this up. Zoom out a little. And I am rendering with scanline, I know, best renderer ever. So what's happening is I've got, let's go into my alpha channels here. I've got it so these hairs that are kind of by themselves are a little bit more transparent, and the render is automatically cropping to the objects that are selected. So what's nice about this is whenever I go into Photoshop, I'm going to change this render size, no matter what it is, to automatically be 512 by 512. It's got an alpha channel because I'm rendering it as a targa. And we can see what the render looks like. So it looks like this. So that's my hair strand. And I personally like the way this looks because I made it and I suck at texturing, and I'm sure somebody else could do better. But this is how I get around it. What else I can do with this is, since I'm doing this in Max, one of the things that you might have noticed is on my textures here, go back in here, you see these little red corners that are showing up. That means that there are keys set on here. So what I've done is, make this smaller, I've gone to my first frame, and on the first frame these are my colors, and then I went to the last frame, and you can see now they're different. So let me kind of scrub through that again. You can see at the beginning there were that, and this is slowly transitioning to a little more of a desaturated, darker color. So that means that every frame I get closer to the end, my hair color is changing. Something else that I did, so that I don't have to redraw this all the time, is I've got my camera rotating around my hair. Okay, so as I'm looking through my camera, let's turn off the wireframe there, you can see that at the beginning I've got this kind of light brown hair, or brown hair, and as I pan around I get this more desaturated hair. This also means that every frame I've basically got a different hair texture that I can use. So what I did was I took all of this and rendered it out. I can show that here, and I'm actually going to show that in the hair strands. So these are the unedited ones, and I rendered out every frame. Then what I did was I figured, okay, so I need 16 textures because of the how I unwrapped all of those hairs. I need 16. So I just went down through and selected 16 of them and kept those and deleted the rest. Then what I did was I brought them into Photoshop. I'm going to open one up just to show you what I did with them. So I'll come back to hair strands, unedited, and I'm just going to open one of these up. So the image size for this is currently not square, and I want it to be square, and I rendered it a little bit larger so that whenever I scale this down, it's going to scale down and not pixelate the image that I had, so I wouldn't have to scale up. And since Max renders things at 72 dpi, this will work fine for that. So what I did was I created a new action in Photoshop and basically recorded myself changing the image size to 512 by 512, saving and closing the image. And what's nice about that is then I can run automate batch and then select the folder of my choosing and run that action on the entire folder, making all the images 512 by 512, which is what I did. And that's what this is. And these are the not those, hair sections. So these are the images that I left, and they are 512 by 512. You can see all the images are the same exact size. So I brought those into Photoshop, and let me put my layers. Come on Photoshop, you can do it. There we go. It's kind of chugging here, so I'm going to turn that off. So you can see I have my opacity. So I brought my images in here. Well, let's just do it like this. I'll open one up. Let's pretend this is the 512 version. So all I had to do was go to select, load selection. It should automatically have alpha selected here if I have an alpha channel. So it selects the alpha. I do move, and I move this in here. So let's hide this. So there's my hair. And now if it were 512, it would perfectly fit in there. It's not, but let's just pretend it was. So I took those all and put them in here. So this is basically the 360 that I had rendered from here. And after that, I had to remove the alpha channel that I had and create a new one. So to do that, I just went to select, load selection, do it based off of layer 12 copies transparency. So it selected that, select, save selection, and I'm not going to hit OK, but it saved my alpha channel. And then I created a new layer, and I painted in it's like a dark brown. It's one of the darker brown colors I could get from the hair texture that's here. So I just selected like that and basically picked a dark brown area. Come on, you can do it. Stop freezing up. And I put that in the background. Whoa. Accidentally painted there. Okay. And I put that in the background. The reason I do that, I don't want to leave it white, because then all of my hair with its alpha channel is going to be this whitish gray color rather than the brown. Come on. Why is this chugging so poorly? Turn on. There we go. Rather than the brown that it should be. The alpha channel will make sure it's transparent like it should be, but it needs to have brown back there. For instance, if I put green back there, then my hair is going to have this green tinge to it, and I don't really want that. So I've created this image, and it's got the alpha channel, so I save that out as a Photoshop file, but I also save it as a Targa. Okay, so I did all that, so I could come back into my Danny Trejo hair sections thing. No, don't save that. Alright. So everything here has been rotated back to how it was before. And we will get to do a little bit of object paint here, but before I do that, let me select these and show you basically what happens if these are rotated the direction that they were. So to do that, I need to make sure that my pivot point is back to align to world. And then whenever I rotate, I'll have to end up fixing this and rotating them back. So then all of the textures that I had there were applied to maximize here in a second. So I'm just going to select that. Okay, so here is my hair. So I'm using the same bitmap for the diffuse as I am for the opacity. And the way I make this work is, I double click this one is set to opaque and RGB intensity, This one, which is using the same exact image, is set to image alpha and alpha, and that will allow it to be transparent and look like this. So now we get into object paint here. Let's see if my objects are in the list. They're currently not. So I'm going to select all the hair objects, and typically it's best if you're naming them. So mine are all named hair some number. So I'm going to select all those, and I'm going to open up my what objects to paint list basically and say add selected. So those are all in there. And I'll close that. Next to this I have my paint on. This is what object am I painting on. So I'm going to paint on selected objects. So I need to make sure Mr. Trejo is selected. You can call him Machete or whatever you want to call him, I don't care. So we're going to paint on him. We're also wanting to make sure that we have in this list that it's dropped down to paint all randomly. So I'm going to, every time I paint one of these 16 hairs on his head. Alright. The next section here is the alignment and basically how many are we painting at what spacing apart. So the alignment that I have is set to Y, and it's aligning to the normal, and it'll follow my stroke path that I have, which is nice. Next to this we have it's my scatter settings basically. So I can, nice thing about this is if you hover over these, I can press Y for the video and it'll show me exactly what these do. So that's kind of nice and max. But basically U is going to, as I paint, move this direction. So if my brush stroke is this direction. V would move it along the brush stroke, and W would move it off of the geometry that I'm painting it on. So let's pretend this one is like move. So it's moving them based off of the brush stroke, away from it. The next section here is kind of like rotate. So I'm going to just set this back to 0 just so I could show this as if I haven't done anything yet. And I'll keep that. So this is like rotate and this is like scale. So if your alignment is to Z, you could change the rotation based on that Z direction. So what I usually will do is I have my hairs here, I've got my face, my head selected, so I'm just going to turn on paint, and just to show this I'm going to paint on the forehead just so you can see what's happening. So we could have some scary eyebrows basically. And this usually defaults to 4, so let me put that back at 4 just so we can see. So I painted this way, but my hair is running the direction I painted. I don't want it to do that. I want it to run adjacent to the direction I'm painting. So I'm going to hit X, which will get rid of those. And this is why I rotated these. So I'm going to go to my list. I'm going to remove everything from here, because as I update these, the ones that are in the list won't update. So I'm going to select everything. I'm going to rotate 90 degrees. So wait for that to say 90. Make sure you have your snaps on. That'll make that easy for rotation. I'm going to go back and do effect pivot point and align to world. And turn that back off. Come back to my list, and now I'll say add selected again and close that out. Select my head again, or else I'm not going to be able to paint on here. So once again, I'm going to just paint on his forehead. Zoom in here. So I'm going to paint. Okay, so this is how I want this to work. Now this is why I said it's best to have some sort of color here. If I don't, it's very easy to see the scalp and it's going to look bad. Even if I move these closer and closer together, as I rotate around, I'm going to be able to see through that, and it's going to look really strange. Another thing, I want my hair to kind of not stick up off the head so much, so that's why I had the Y direction here rotated down. Now I don't want it to go so far that it's going through the head, so I want to pull back to where nothing is passing through the head here. So just check. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So I'm going to just come back off of here a little bit. Before I did 39, that was the setting I had in there. We'll just try 50 and see how that works. Or actually, I'll do 45 because I'm crazy. Okay, so I've got all these different hair strands. So if I turn on my wireframe, I can see the geometry of all these pieces, which is going to be a lot less than if I were to take the individual strands that I had like from the other file, which is another way to go about it, but it's going to be a lot higher polygons. And I usually work with games, so I don't want to do that. I know this is high poly, but this isn't the one that I would use for the games model. I'd use the normal maps. Anyway, so at any point here, as long as I haven't hit check, I could hit X to get out of that. So let me get back out of wireframe here. So I'm going to just start forward here and kind of paint back. And you can see as I paint around, it's going to follow my brush stroke. Okay, I hit undo there to kind of start over. So I'm going to make sure I'm back behind the hairline a little bit, or maybe just want to be really kind of close to it. I'm going to try to get used to doing that. Okay, so as I look at this, you can see how it's going to look, and it looks kind of cool. And I get these weird little artifacts kind of happening here. I'm not going to have to worry about that. Whenever I render, those shouldn't show up. So if I go ahead and render here, they do slightly show up. So this is just my UVs are maybe passing over into area that has texture on it. I could go into Photoshop and clean this up and get rid of any little problems that I have like that. But I also noticed that his material has maybe not. Thought it had something weird going on with it. But as I render this, yeah, there's definitely something going on with his. Might just be because there are no lights in here. Let's make sure. That's strange. I would have thought there was going to be like a reflection map or something, because I brought this from Mudbox. But whenever I zoom out, I don't really see those little artifacts so much. And right now I have it on a light colored background, so you'd really be able to see that. So I'm going to hit undo because all the stuff I did just submitted that to keep it. But one of the things I was going to say is, as I painted this, all the hairs are coming out the same size. So what I can do is now I can come in here and say, well, let's first check out paint them in a ramp. So this means that I'm going to start at a low number, so 20, and paint up to the full size that it was, 100%. And then I can kind of decide, okay, yeah, I like the way that looks, or I don't like the way that looks. So let's start back here on the hair a little bit. So you can see as I paint this, it's kind of starting with smaller hairs, and they're getting bigger as they go. And I could paint a couple strands and just see if I like the way that looks or not. In the front, this is going to end up looking like he's got cornrows. So I can decide, yeah, I don't really like the way that's looking, so I'm going to close out of that. Maybe I'll try a different size here, so I'll go 50 to 100. So let's zoom out here. So I'm going to start back here. And kind of paint some of this on here. And the nice thing is, since I have those brush strokes set up, I just painted some upwards at the very end that I didn't mean to do. But it's going to follow my brush strokes. So the hair is actually going to have this look that it's been kind of brushed in place. I don't really mind how that's looking. I do tend to like going with using random, just because this is looking pretty even, but I kind of like how it starts off here. So maybe I'll do more of this just so we can see how this looks. It's going to get a little bit tricky to paint some of this, just because if I want to keep my hair kind of going the same way that I've got it going right now, it's kind of hard to see where I'm, kind of getting down here. Yeah. Kind of like that. And once I hit the check button here, I'll be able to go in and delete some if I've kind of gone a little further into the hairline that I, really wanted to. So I'm just gonna kind of keep working at this. Kind of keep putting these in place. Whoa! Oh, those are the. I thought I had painted them like way out there. I was kind of wondering what had happened there. And all these settings can kind of be adjusted on the fly too. So if I found that maybe I don't like the way something's looking here, I can always come in and change my rotation to do something else, which is really a nice feature. And just keep painting in until I've got this kind of all covered up. And it's also nice if you have this hairline in here so you can kind of keep your it's just kind of funny to see Danny Trejo with this like Kramer-like hair. And then I can just kind of fill in the hair up front as needed. And yeah, it's very Cosmo looking. So I'm going to hit the little check button. I'm going to turn that off. Now I can go in and kind of refine some of this. So if I've got some weird ones that are sticking out like this one here, I can just go in, select, and delete. Another nice thing about this is now that I've kind of got this hair here, all of this hair is instanced from this original hair. So if I make any changes to these, it's going to update these as long as I don't break that instance connection. So let's say I were to select all of these hairs and I applied an edit poly to them, and I selected all of their tops. Let's say all the top polygons here. Make it a little easier to see. Just select all these. I was going to say autosave, now's not the time to happen. Doing a thing. Alright, so I select all those. I'm going to do soft selection. And I'll just kind of select down and just make sure I don't get the very bottom. And I'm going to put a noise modifier on here. And what I'm going to do is, whoa, because the noise modifier is on all these, it's putting them on all of this. So let's not look at that right now because that looks crazy. But this will allow me to kind of add more randomness. I don't know what word I want to say there. Randomization, randomness. So I'm going to do this at, let's say, 20 by 20 by 20, something like that. Okay, so kind of got that going on. So it's really changed it up. I'm going to deselect that and hope I can now see what this looks like. Whoa. Alright, come on. Select that, turn off the wireframe. So let's make this a bit bigger. So it's a little more disheveled than it was. And let's turn on our safe frames. Let's see what this looks like. Oh, he's got a huge bald spot right there that I didn't paint. Oh, I guess not. That's just the... Oh, I didn't go very far back there, but... He's ugly. He's an ugly man. Not Danny Trejo, but this guy. Yeah. And then we could go even further and, you know, put eyebrows on with this, and then fill in his mustache and make it beautiful. But that's a way we can go about making hair from geometry. So, hope you guys liked the video. Please like, subscribe, and share the video with other people. People seem to really like this tree video that I made that's also object paint, that also kind of does a lot of the same stuff that I did here, but it did it for making a very nice organic looking pine tree. So check that video out if you like this one, and send me comments, send me messages saying what you would like to see, and I will see if I can get around to doing that. I might be a little slow going about doing that, but I do my best to try to do tutorials if people make requests. So again, thanks for watching.